Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Right for Your Life. I'm Caleb.
And I'm Timothy.
So, if Tim sounds a little different this week, Tim, give him a little background.
So I currently am on vacation, I guess. And I was planning what I was going to say for this morning when I woke up, and then I realized I'm an absolute idiot. So I will explain in full. I am currently recording on a pair of headphones because I am in North Carolina and visiting various folks. And so I don't have any of my recording set up with me, which is really sad because earlier this week I had actually just rebuilt my setup essentially. So I've got a pop filter now, I've got a shock mount. It's going to sound incredible next time we record, but it doesn't sound incredible this week. And so I was waking up and I was trying to figure out, okay, how I'll explain this. I want to do it a slightly funny way, blah, blah, blah. And then I realized that I'm an absolute idiot because I have a mobile recorder with phantom power. I could have just brought my setup with me. Like I could record on my normal setup with the mobile recorder and just it wouldn't have been any different. So I'm really kicking myself that that happened. But hopefully you'll only have to endure this for a single episode and then we'll both be back to high quality audio. But I figure if you can listen to Caleb do this for, what was it, 5 episodes or something, you can listen to me for one episode.
Absolutely. I still don't think you sound as bad as I did in episode one and two, which episode one and two, I sounded awful. So, I think that the listeners, the one reader, and the one watcher will be able to understand and move past this for at least a little bit.
I certainly hope so.
Do you want to get into the piece for this week?
Yeah, let's do it. This is a bit of a longer one, so might as well hop right in.
Altar of self. Blood was still lightly dripping deep red from the last victim. Any light seemed to be absorbed into it, and even still, the dagger raced high once again for another sacrifice. Kicking and screaming was this victim, pleading that all they wanted was the best for the person who was about to end their life. I knew them. I knew them well. We both did, but that didn't matter. Each day felt like this more and more. Another sacrifice, another close one brought low by the blade, a great cost for a little more freedom gained. It was just a few at first, the necessary few, a demonstration that if you do not fall in line, you will fall at their hand. I supported them at first. It was good. It was right. They were burdened and constrained. They couldn't even walk for fear of retribution, choked out by the anger and passion of ones that they trusted. Something snapped one day, like lightning from above. They promised that heads would roll, sins would be paid for, offerings would be due, blood be spilt in their name and in the name of their freedom. It was not a bluff like we believed at first, it was forceful like a hurricane. We thought that if we let it happen once, it would stop. All would be made well. The thirst for blood would be quenched, the freedom gained from the sacrifice would be enough. It wasn't. It never is. We gave them just enough strength, just enough courage. We gave them just enough. That wasn't where we made the mistake, though. Teaching a bird with new wings how to fly is what we were taught to do, called to do. The mistakes came after. This newfound power, newfound freedom was too much for their hands. Each one placed at the altar was breaking them out of their cage of cowardice, fleeing from their past and into a new life. The more the bonds yielded, the more they grew. Eventually, we didn't recognize them. Once a child of fear, now the bringer of it. Eventually, they didn't know the difference between sacrifice and slaughter. It was all killing to them. It was all pain and loss. To be fair, there was so much that needed to be lost and much pain that needed to be felt. In order to grow, we must prune the weeds that choke and bind, till the ground for new soil. They went from feeling it all to feeling nothing. It was such a rapid downhill spiral that we couldn't stop it. When we tried, a few of us became victims. I still remember the words spoken with a bloody dagger and a steady hand of their friend turned victim. Let it be. Most of us fled, a couple of us stayed. It wasn't long before their eyes were filled with indignation towards us. We were able to pacify them for a while, praises, psalms, offerings. We were hoping these gifts would be enough. It wasn't. It never is. Their goal was freedom. Everything could be the cost. Everything was on the table. Even us, their most loyal followers. We were hoping that they would see the bodies piling up. We were hoping that they would see their anger rise at any small inconvenience. We were hoping to show them the way towards humility and meekness. They would hear no such thing, see no such thing. They were blind, blind to anything outside of them and their needs. It was beyond unfeeling and uncaring. It was beyond malice. It was joy at the blood spilled at the altar. It did not matter from where the blood came as long as it flowed as an offering to them. They could not see that they were beginning to be the thing that caused this cycle. The crushing weight of their need for freedom was more than anyone could bear. Any slight, any provocation, any dissatisfaction would be enough. My hands tremble writing this, for if they were to read it, they would find that I see error in them. That alone would be worthy of me to be laid at the altar. They cannot see the love beneath it, the care, the concern that I have. They would only see heresy. I do not want any more lashings, so I am amenable to their whims. I am walking on eggshells, working out my days with fear and trembling, hoping the dagger would not be turned towards me. I do not even know why I stay. Maybe it is just that I hope that the hurt they do towards me will show them the error of their ways. There is no one left besides this current sacrifice and I. All others have bled out on the altar or have fled far from this place. I can still smell the viscera of my friends. I can still feel their screams in my chest. I wish to join them in the afterlife. There I may find peace from this place. If not die, then maybe I can flee to where others ran, though I doubt they would accept me. I would consider myself lucky to be welcomed back into their arms after having watched them fall and done nothing. I could also do what my Lord has done to me. I could slay them upon their own altar. They may be free from anything, even the constraint of their own flesh. If I do, then I will be the only one left, a failed servant of a failed God. How would the world treat a traitorous disciple? How would I treat myself? The offering still squirms at the altar. It does not speak anymore. It couldn't do so if desired. A lowly friend that should have been left alone, but they drug them from the town square just to have a little more wiggle room, a little more constraint. They owe no one anything, for there is not anyone who could collect. This is the last victim I will witness. I cannot have more blood spilt with my eyes on it. My heart cannot take it. I leave a last message, my last shout into the void of their heaven and my hell. Alone we found you. Alone you find yourself again. May you find love in your freedom, as you did not find it in friendship. So, what did you think?
It is a lot darker than most of the other stuff we've done on the podcast so far. I am really excited to talk about this because I think this is probably one of the pieces that I have delved the least into and probably know/understand the least about. But hearing you read it, it felt a lot more like someone was writing something out, kind of chronicling and processing at the same time, if that makes sense. Like they're just beginning to record what is happening, and then slowly throughout, it drifts more into here's what I think about what's happening, here's how what happened, and then it goes full on into wait, what am I even doing here? How can I get out? When I was reading it myself, it felt a little more like something that had been written out with the express purpose of getting to the end, to the conclusion. They're writing this for the purpose of saying, I'm going to leave. But when you read it, I think it's the way you read things, and it's also kind of the way you write things. It felt more train of thought. It felt less intentional as to where this story was going.
That was sort of the intentionality, was that this is a character writing out thoughts and feelings. And I am uncertain whether the character started out writing this to deliver to their god, for lack of a better term, or whether they just started writing this and, like you said, processed and came to this conclusion in the midst, which is probably a reflection of me, the writer, as I was going through and had the idea for this and started writing. Oftentimes I just have the idea and then I start writing it, and then I will end up at a conclusion that I feel is sufficient. Sometimes I have a conclusion and then I will write about how to get there. This was one of those times that I had the idea and that the conclusion was somewhere out there. I just had to go find it. I kind of was very happy with the place that I ended up with, as a, okay, I'm going to leave this as a note. I sort of imagine this note being found at the altar the next time said person goes to visit, right? So they do not see their most trusted, loyal friend there. They instead see this note placed upon the altar, sort of a substitute for them.
And that's particularly poignant with that line at the end. May you find love in your freedom as you did not find it in friendship. And this note being a replacement for that person is essentially the real life application of that line, where, hey, you're completely free now. You can go do whatever you want, but you've lost all of us.
Yeah, and if it's not abundantly clear to me, this is social commentary where there's a strong sentiment that I don't owe anything to anybody. I don't owe anyone anything. And it may be true that you physically don't owe anyone anything, but in order to be engaged in proper community, people do things for each other. There is a give and take. And it's not a reflection of owe and don't owe. It is just, hey, we're people who sort of live around each other and we engage in life with one another in various ways, which means that sometimes that you will be doing things for people and that people will be doing things for you. And to treat people as if you don't get anything out of this, then what's the purpose of doing it? That's a horrible way to live because you find yourself like the target of this note, which is you will find yourself alone because you cared about yourself more than you cared about literally anything else or anyone else.
Is that the idea you started with, or is that something that happened because you had an idea for something and this was the commentary that flowed out of that idea?
That was the idea that I started with because I don't remember exactly what inspired the idea, but I've always sort of, again, hated that sentiment of I don't know nothing to nobody. Because I think it misses the point. And so I wanted to sort of circle that back around. And living in a modern day America means being very individualistic, which there are positive attributes to that. I do nod to that in the piece, right? Of like, yeah, there were some people that they did need to let go of, and there were things that they did need to move past. And there was, like some people, when you break off a relationship with people, like hurt happens. And sometimes that's necessary if the people are not good for you. But seeing no one as being good for you unless they contribute to you, or they always contribute to you in this case, where it is like they started cutting off people who they absolutely shouldn't have because it was inconvenient.
I think it's really interesting taking that idea that this is what you wanted to say, but perceiving it, showing it from essentially the third person, because the person who's writing this letter essentially, is not the person who you're talking about. We are seeing this idea of individualism and me above all else from an outside perspective. And I think it's a really great way to do it because if we saw it from the internal monologue of the person who's, killing everybody and going too far and all of this stuff, if we saw it from that perspective, I don't think it would hit nearly as hard and it wouldn't have the impact you wanted it to. Because, like you said, we live in a culture that does praise that mentality to at least some extent. And if we saw that in a main character, we might think, oh, this is great. It might lead to celebrating that character. But because we're seeing it from the outside, you really get to show how bad it actually can get. And you get to show the extent of the damage that can be done by this, as opposed to the internal justification behind it. Because us as readers, we're already familiar with the justification behind this, at least in our culture. We understand this is where this person is coming from. But to see the effects of it, that's where you really get the impact that you were wanting out of this piece. And I think that it was just a very, very good choice to write it from that perspective.
Yeah, and part of this inspiration has come from people in my life that I've known that I am no longer friends with and or no longer around.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, right? Like it was the constant taking, the constant you should give me something. You should always be an additive to me. If you are not an additive, then you are nothing. Yeah, because I did want to avoid the feeling that this was completely justified. I think it's always easier from the outside looking in, right? It would be harder to do that. It would be harder to justify the character having this. It would wind up with you the character being alone and feeling betrayed.
Yeah.
Which, yes, correct. The character is alone and betrayed, according to them, and is oblivious to the altar that is permanently stained red.
It's interesting because I think you could write the story that way. I think it would have to be a much longer story. You would have to rely on things like an unreliable narrator and stuff like that to make sure to give the reader the sense that this person is not telling me what's actually happening. They're telling me what I feel, and so I need to look outside of that. I think that could be done, but especially in a short story like this, I do think that this was a much better option because the other one takes so much longer to set up and so much longer to pay off. And like you said, writing the ending of that book would be so hard.
Well, the funny thing is, I think this is the ending.
Oh.
Like, the book ends with this. The book ends with I walk into my chambers and I can feel the peace and the silence that is surrounding me. You know, the candles are lightly flickering against the walls. There's no disruption, there's no disturbance, but I see something missing. Where are they? Where are they? They're not here. You know, and the talk about the lashings, right? My servant is not here. Where are they? They must pay for this. They are, you know, this is an act of betrayal, not being here. This is an important day. I need them here. I need them here now. What is this? They pick up the page and they start to read. And they read this. And the book can end with just that line.
Now I want you to write that whole book. That's so cool. That would work so well. Oh, the perspective switch at the very end because you just go into reading the letter. Oh man. Yeah. This is why you're the horror writer and I'm not. That is brilliant.
Maybe so. I'll put it on the backlog.
Yeah, I mean you could just what, pound that out in a couple weeks, right? No big deal. You got nothing else going on.
Yeah, nothing else. Nothing else is going to be happening in the next couple of weeks.
Ooh.
The foreshadowing ghost. TM, 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 TM. Be looking for stickers soon.
I mean, we could do a Redbubble thing because they do print on demand, so we don't have to keep a backlog of stuff like an inventory or anything.
Oh man, if people wanted the foreshadowing ghost, let us know.
I mean, I won't make it for myself, but I will put a sticker on my laptop if other people want one as well.
I mean, I kind of want one now.
I'll see if Key can design something. She is also very busy with creative things.
Oh, beautiful. Be looking out for that. Be looking out for that on our socials. Maybe you can catch a glimpse of the foreshadowing ghost.
To completely change, well, not completely change the vibe, but to switch it up a little bit, this in particular, I think really gets across one of the ways you write, which is very vibe based. Not that you write for vibes only, but you're very atmospheric when you write. And you do a really good job setting not only a visual scene, but also an emotional scene. And it was really powerful with this short story in particular. And I was wondering, how do you do that?
Ooh. There's a writing principle that basically says the reader should use all of their senses when reading.
Interesting.
So, in this case, there is smell. There is not necessarily touch, but you can imagine what this dagger looks like. You can see the blood dripping, right? All of the things that I sort of evoke, the kicking and screaming. Actually, there is feeling. I can still feel their screams in my chest. So, trying to pull from the different senses to make you experience it with as many of your senses as possible is something that I try to lean on. And I also use pictures a lot, mostly mental pictures, but I see a picture and I'm like, okay, what if I were to try to describe this to a blind person? What would I use?
Yeah.
There is a piece that I wrote the other day where I'm like, I saw this person and there were shadows flicking across their face and I could see them heaving very deeply and their breath was misting into the air, right? That gives you the sense that it's wet and cold and it's at night and there's been something happening. They're a little bit tired because of the heaving. And that helps set tone very well because the more that you choose to describe those things, the more that the picture brings itself to life.
So it's almost like you're giving the reader a very descriptive mental image of essentially a single snapshot. If someone did a painting of this scene, and they can use that to then build upon it with everything else you're giving them. And because you're hitting all the senses, and because you are describing something that is, you know, visceral, terrible, whatever adjective you want to use, you've drawn them in, and they're in that painting now. And then you give them all of this other information, and that's what really makes the atmosphere kind of come alive.
Right, because I try to avoid describing things that don't matter. So, in the case of this, there's a victim that is being drugged in, kicking and screaming. I do not describe their gender. I do not describe their race. I do not describe their hair color. I do not describe what they're wearing. I don't describe any of that kind of stuff. I describe that they're being drugged in. They're kicking and screaming, and what that feels like and what that looks like. That can be very personal because you can sort of take people or events or experiences in your life and you can format them to fit that. So I think that is the not saying things out loud part that we've talked about before.
If you leave it unspoken, A, it allows the reader to fill in what they are wanting to have happen there, what they're picturing. But also, if you describe it too much, then it becomes dry. And your intellectual brain takes over, figuring out, okay, this is exactly how I need to picture all this stuff. But if you just describe what's absolutely necessary and you lean on those emotional descriptions, then the reader never has to think about what's going on. It's just popping into mind immediately. And so they can stay focused on what's happening, how it's making them feeling.
Right. More emotional description than it is physical description. Or scenes that, or physical things that give you an emotional response, such as a dagger raised high, the very specific choice of, I can still remember the phrase that they said, before their friend turned victim, let it be.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of emotional weight behind just those three words.
Yeah. And I think another thing that also goes into that, I mean, it's just let it be. There's no description, there's nothing else. And I think another thing that contributes, especially to the way you write, which is, more horror, more atmospheric, is a lot of unknown. Because oftentimes the unknown can be foreboding, it can be scary, it can be intimidating, it can be a lot of these things. And you, I think, especially in this piece, do a very good job of using that to your advantage because there is so much unknown, especially when you start reading the short story. I had so many questions the first time I started reading it. And honestly, I had to read it 2 or 3 times to get the main gist of what was going on. But I think that lent itself very well to the feelings that you were trying to elicit through the piece.
Yeah, it's frantic. It's scary. I'm trying to write this thing down comprehensively, but also quickly. I cannot be spotted doing this thing. And the phrasing of, again, the emotional response that comes from the words like heresy and sacrifice and altar and disciple and God and all of those other things paints a weighty feeling.
It's interesting you use the word weighty there because oftentimes when I think of the word weighty, the image that pops in my mind is, some sort of like a large building, like a cathedral or something like that, where just being in the building is a very kind of weighty feeling in a way. And you never describe, as far as I know, you never describe the room in which this is occurring. But I have such a clear picture in my head
I don't.
of exactly where this is. I think that's really cool.
And that's part of the not saying things is what that altar looks like may look very, very different. And I am letting the reader fill in what that altar looks like. Because for me and you, like my mental image is very different from your mental image, which is very different from everyone else's mental image. But the key attributes are there.
Well, I really have enjoyed talking about this because, especially talking about your original purpose behind it, but then also how you wrote it. Sometimes when we read the short stories and we talk about them, I already know a lot of what I'm going to say, and I know a lot of what we're going to talk about, and it's really interesting. But then sometimes like this one, I have got so much out of this conversation. I feel like I have such a greater understanding of what this story was about and why you wrote it and how you wrote it, and I think it's really neat that every time we talk about one of these, it just kind of jumps up onto the favorites list, no matter how I ranked it before.
Yeah, and I think that's the oh, was it to be known is to be loved? There's a phrase that goes like that or something like that. And so whether it is books or movies or TV shows or anything like that, the people who love it the most know a lot about it. And so, for these sorts of things, the more intimately you know something, the more that you can sort of draw upon that, and the more that that you can begin to love something. And that was part of the reason for discussing this and also discussing the things that we'll talk about later, right? Is to share the love that we have for writing and the love that we have for writing poems and short stories is so that way we can sort of express these things to an audience to see like, hey, these are some pretty cool and beautiful things.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but that makes a lot of sense. And it makes sense why you can dig so much into literature and tear it apart and analyze it and do all of this stuff. And assuming it's good literature, not only does it hold up, but it increases your enjoyment of it. I know, in high school, especially when I was having to take literature and we would analyze books and all of that stuff, sometimes I would just hate every minute of the experience because I really didn't like the book, and then we would move on. But when it was a book that I liked, when we got into the analyzing, it just gave me such a greater appreciation for the book itself and the experience of reading it. And so next time I read it, it was more alive, and I was able to be more into the book and notice things I hadn't noticed before, make connections I hadn't made before, because I had done all of this work of knowing the book. And I guess, I mean, you can make analogies to anything. You can make analogies to marriage, you can make analogies to other creative works, you can make analogies to friendships, you can make analogies to Christianity, anything you want to do. I think that's really neat. I hadn't really thought about reading in that way before.
Games have replayability, movies have rewatchability, books have rereadability. And the more sort of meaning that you can pack into a space at a time means that the audience can enjoy it more over and over again because they get this different feeling, they get this different sense every time that they read it because they're picking up on new details and new things. And this is part of the reason why like English teachers teach these things is so that way people can understand and have these. I mean, we're probably your English teacher's favorite podcast, so
I think it might be my mom's favorite podcast, which means yes. I this is my teacher's favorite podcast.
I need to send this to all my English teachers now. Well, I need to print them off a transcript and send it to them.
We need to get more readers. We have our listenership, we got to get our readership up.
There's a plug for readership at the end. I'm not going to do it now.
We want to move on to the next section that is entirely something that everybody's expecting.
Uh, yes, we will move on to the next segment that is something that everyone is expecting and that we have set well in precedence for the past 7 episodes. So we're going to change that right now. Tim, what's inspired you this week, man?
I have honestly had trouble deciding what I wanted to talk about in this segment because there's quite a few things. So I think I'm going to cheat and I'm going to mention one thing really briefly, and then I'm going to talk in depth about another thing. So the first thing I want to mention really briefly is because you just talked about rewatchability, rereadability, all of that stuff, and I just wanted to give a great example of that. The first Knives Out movie, mysteries have a way of being not rereadable because then you already know what happens. Maybe you read it again to see if you could spot all the clues, and then that's it. But there are a couple books and a few movies that somehow managed to break out of that. And Knives Out is a great example. I don't want to talk too much in detail about it because I think we've already talked about Knives Out movies in the past, but it just came to mind as a great example of the story still has value even though I know the ending. It still has enjoyment, even though I know the ending, because everything up to the ending is so full of symbolism and meaning and just creative excellence. And I think that is just a great example of something that is made with more purpose than just a gotcha at the end. But the thing that I really want to talk about is a slight pet peeve, but also a plug for a fantastic thing. So, I don't know if you're familiar. I assume you're familiar with Homer's The Odyssey. So, are you aware that there is now a musical version of The Odyssey?
Yes, that's not the direction I thought you were going about something relating to the Odyssey that is new or recent.
So, while we were driving, me and my wife were driving to North Carolina. It is a long drive. And I think the musical, it's called Epic, in case readers or listeners don't know about it. It's very good. You should go listen to it. But it's 2.5 hours or so long. So last couple hours of the drive, we listened to the entire musical. It was perfect. It actually ended 3 minutes before we arrived at our destination. Couldn't have planned it better. And I absolutely love this musical. I'm a big fan of musicals in general. I like this musical because it has a lot of the things that I tend to enjoy with high quality musicals. The use of themes is very good, where you get parts of the story purely from who is singing which theme. Les Mis also does this, where themes will switch back and forth depending on who is being what kind of person in the scene at the moment. I think the musicality is also really cool. There's a lot of creative choices that are made that are excellent. A lot of fantastic singers. But the thing that I want to talk about specifically is something that is somewhat of a theme on this podcast, which is authorship intent versus the experience the readers have or the listeners have from a work of art. Because the creator of Epic said at one point, I don't remember when it was or where it was, but it was on a YouTube short somewhere. I may be able to find it. He said that his purpose in making the musical, kind of the thing he wanted people to get out of it, is that sometimes having ruthlessness, sometimes being, crude and all of this sort of stuff, sometimes that is necessary in life. And he said he gave some examples of not examples, but he said it came from stuff in his past and his own life experience and all of this. And that's not what I have a problem with. That's perfectly fine. But the thing I have the problem with is how he used the musical to make that point. Because I don't think that the Odyssey is the story to do that with. He did change some things, obviously, because when you adapt to a different medium, you have to change some things about the story. You have to change pacing. Sometimes you have to change characters slightly or things like that. 100% on board with that. And I don't mind the changes he made because it's a really good musical and it still follows the flow of the story. But the problem is, the point of the Odyssey, when Homer wrote it, was not, oh, ruthlessness can sometimes be a useful thing. The point of the Odyssey is the consequences of pride. The inciting moment in the book, and I guess spoilers if you haven't read a book that's been out for, I don't know, 6,000 years, but spoilers, the inciting moment of the book is when Odysseus basically he assumes that he is unstoppable and he brags about himself and doxes himself to the Cyclops. And then because of that, all the stuff with Poseidon happens, and then everything else happens, and everything gets ruined. And there's other instances of him being prideful, like when his crew betrays him and stuff like that. That is because he didn't trust them and he thought he could make the decision by himself and all of this. And this is all in the musical. And then the creator of the musical also throws in a few things about, uh, having to be ruthless and stuff like that. But I think the story does not do a good job of reinforcing his purpose. I think if he wanted to make a musical that reinforced or said what he wanted it to say, I don't think the Odyssey was a good choice because the entire linchpin of the story is Odysseus being prideful and how that's his downfall. And I just think it's a really interesting example of where a creator uses, in my opinion, the wrong story to convey their message. And that's actually something that I was working on in my book as well was, what's the message I want to convey and does the story convey it? And it didn't, which is partially why I had to rewrite the ending. And I just think it's really interesting seeing that and knowing, hey, this is what the author or the writer intended, and then just straight up not getting it from the work of art.
Yeah, and that's part of the beauty and frustration of art as well, is that the intentionality of the author can be displayed exceptionally well, and the point can be completely missed at the same time because of all of the other things that are happening or the medium for which it is being told through. And yeah, it is funny because in that, like you're right, Odysseus is shrewd and ruthless, but he's shrewd and ruthless because he is prideful. And if he was less prideful, he wouldn't have to be as shrewd or as ruthless as he has to be. So, like saying that, sometimes when things are bad or sometimes when things are not going well, you need to be ruthless and shrewd. Yeah, in order to get yourself out of a bind or get yourself out of a bad place, or if life has you in bad circumstances, you need to play your cards well. You may even need to have more grit about you and do those sorts of things. Totally get that. But also, if you have to do it because you put yourself there, that's completely different. Well, it's sort of one of the themes that I play with in my book, right? Like, I have a character that is ruthless. And so the part of the whole theme is that, like, sometimes ruthlessness is necessary. Sometimes these things are necessary. But I also make it very clear that it's not necessarily the character's decision that these events are happening, except for, when it is the character's decision or they are put themselves in that situation, there's a lot of situational awareness to that. But if there's no awareness of the character has put themselves in this bad place and now they are having to make these hard decisions, then sometimes messages can get lost.
And that's not to say that the musical is bad or anything like that. I think, somewhat ironically, that the creator of the musical did a fantastic job conveying, Homer's original intent with the book. It's a fantastic musical. He did so well on it. It's just interesting to see how it didn't work as well with the vision that he wanted for it, purely because of the story that he was drawing from. If he had chosen a different story, I think he could have gotten the point across well, very well. It was something I was thinking about in a new light last time I listened to it because of what we've been talking about on this podcast.
That is one of the things that again is great about creative works and creative pieces is that the author can say that this is their intent, and then you can be like, well, that doesn't come through at all, and you can disagree with them. This is what makes this different from math is you can just say like there is not an objective right answer here. You attempted to convey this. I don't think it was conveyed well. I think this was conveyed,
Yeah.
and according to your interpretation you can both be like that can be satisfactory, even if it is frustrating.
All right. Well, what has inspired you recently?
What has inspired me recently is a book that I'm reading for work, oddly enough. So, at work, there are often like lots and lots of books,
Hmm.
right? Professional development, all of that other kind of stuff. And so, I I do a lot of listening more so than I do reading. And so I listen to the audiobook of How the Mighty Fall and Why Some Companies Never Give In. It's a very long title. Speaking of pet peeves this morning, don't add the subtitle to your book if the title of your book is perfectly fine. The story of the book is basically how really big or great companies wind up going under. And this book was written around the great financial crisis of 2008. And so it paints a really specific point in history because he talks about this like revolutionary company of Best Buy, which Best Buy has had to like close stores recently and do a bunch of other things that he calls into the book of being like not good things to do. But why it's inspiring to me particularly is that it's sort of it's a good like point in time piece, right? Again, you know about the 2008 financial crisis, or if you're young enough and you weren't alive when when the financial crisis was happening, it paints a good picture of sort of like what's going on, and also what companies that you were like, oh yeah, I forgot that they just completely went under. I forgot that blank had happened in this time, or oh yeah, I do remember them. But I like it as a point in time piece. I also like it as I do think it's a good professional development book. It's funny that you talk about Odysseus and the Odyssey because stage one, there's like five different stages that a company can progress through
Hmm.
on their way down. Stage number one is essentially pride.
Mm,
We're number one. We're up top. We're the best. So, like, we're unstoppable and we're unbeatable. And that pride leads to overreaching. And that overreaching leads to neglect of things that matter. And so that leads to ultimately not having enough resources, which basically means that you die because you don't have enough resources to sustain yourself. Or you can recognize we're in a really bad place and then we need to pay attention to the things that matter again. And if we start paying attention to the things that matter again and the culture that got us here, then maybe we can still survive. And maybe we can bounce back and maybe we can be better than we were before. Because one company that I think about that he does not mention because it hadn't happened yet when he wrote the book is Lego,
yeah.
because Lego didn't really used to be very popular, right? Like, like kids played with Legos and adults didn't. But Lego stuck to their sort of guns, right? And they made some good creative decisions. Um, Lego didn't start trying to make other things. They just learned how to make Legos better and learned how to make better Lego sets. And now they are a very popular brand that has IP everywhere. They're making video games regularly. They're doing a whole bunch of other things, and they've experienced a large growth because they essentially were humble and were like, okay, we make plastic bricks. How can we make plastic bricks better? And we make toys and experiences that people have together. How can we do that? And they didn't try to scramble and do a bunch of weird and wacky things that didn't
Hmm.
make sense. And so they became a mainstream brand. And I find it funny that in the corporate space and in the creative space, right, there's this telling of like pride will lead to your downfall.
Yeah.
So I think that's a wonderful connection. I also was contrasting it with how to do it in like personal lives and personal endeavors, right? So, because we're essentially trying to build a
Hmm.
brand somewhat with this repeated rhymes and rhythms, and part of it is like not overstretching yourself too far too fast before you have the resources to do the things that you need to do well, and only investing a little bit of time and effort into the things that you're experimenting with until you prove that they can be successful, and spending the majority of your time on like your main flywheel is what he calls it, which in this case is the podcast is the main flywheel, and any of the other stuff that we're doing, socials or other creative things to attach to this, are sort of these secondary pieces. But the main thing is focusing on this. But that's the business. But in personal life, it's like maybe you should take some more creative risks in your personal life. Like most people are much too conservative, and that this is a great thing if you're doing a business, but not all things that are practical for business are practical for personal reasons.
Well, it's interesting you say, taking some risks and stuff like that because I mean, again, to reference last meals, I've been watching a few more of them. Do go watch them; they're really good. Priyanka Chopra Jonas was on there, and she was talking about how a lot of people tend to be afraid of being uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable is really what allows you to improve. Putting yourself in situations that either, are uncomfortable or are painful or something like that, with the focus of I'm going to do this to improve myself, to get better, to open up new opportunities, all of these things. I mean, where's, for example, for this podcast, we're sacrificing sleep, we're sacrificing time, we're having to learn a lot of new things, we're stretching our brains in new ways, all of this stuff. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, but it is, regardless of what happens to the podcast and regardless of, how our thousandth episode goes, we are learning because of this. We are growing because of this. And I think that, in a way, it's not necessarily the exact antithesis of pride, but I think it is a way to combat, especially the negative effects of pride. Because if you're always growing, if you're always putting yourself in a situation that is not comfortable, then that can really help keep you humble because you see not only your strengths, but also your weaknesses.
Yeah, if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find a smarter room.
Yeah, or you need to realize that you're dumb in some other ways.
Right. Yeah, you need to go to a different room. Or maybe you need to be humble and
Yeah,
realize you're not the
yeah.
smartest person
No,
in the room.
nobody is ever the smartest person in the room. It's always somebody else.
Hmm, that's a bar.
I get to finally have the one-liner of the episode. I feel like I've arrived.
We need to put a compilation of one-liners together. We'll do that at some point. So, as a part of this new format, we have obviously moved what inspires us to be earlier in the episode. And we're going to try to end with what we're working on if we particularly have things that we want to discuss that we're working on. Because some parts of writing are waiting or simply working on the same thing for a very long time, especially when you're talking about a novel. So if there's something relevant that we would like to discuss with what we're working on, we will discuss that here. That way we can keep the audience informed and updated without sort of sending out like very, very small updates on things or things that may not be as honestly things that may not be as interesting to hear about, such as me talking about editing for the fifth or sixth episode in a row. And that's part of the craft of this. And this was based upon listener feedback. So, again, keep sending us things, keep sending in reviews, different things like that. So, with that, Tim, is there anything that you'd like to talk about this week with what you're working on?
So I think so. You can cut this in editing if it ends up sucking, but I did end up finishing the scene I was writing between the main character and then this girl that he meets. And the thing, well, the thing I specifically want to talk about is how, in my mind, writing can sometimes be like a puzzle. And that is probably a very engineer thing to say. But I knew what I had to have happen by the end of the scene. And I had an idea of where the scene started. I had to adjust where the scene started some because it just wasn't flowing properly. But the thing that was really cool to me is I knew what was going to happen later in the book. And I wanted to, hint towards some things and set up some things that can then be payoffs later. And a lot of those came while I was writing the scene, but it was really neat to see, okay, I have to fit in, this thing that's going to be paid off in two sentences, but then this thing is going to be paid off in, five chapters, and set up this trait about this person that will then become very important later in the story. And it was like a puzzle trying to see how I can make a somewhat organic feeling conversation flow through the beats I needed it to while adding in these little dashes of information that the reader hopefully may think is relevant, but doesn't see the relevance of until a lot later. I can't say what any of them are because that would be huge spoilers for the ending of the book, but it was really fun trying to work all of that stuff in. And there was one particular point near the end of the conversation where the girl, she's a waitress, she's having to go back to waiting tables. And there were two particular things I wanted to have happen. And I'd written the conversation with this particular exchange of him asking her out on a date and her laughing and saying, well, I suppose, essentially. And I loved that interaction. But there was also another piece of information I had to fit in there because of something he said that she would have then responded to in character. So if I was just writing the book with the purpose of, oh, I want to get these beats in, it just would have gone through and that would have been it. But because I was able to figure out who she was as a character, I realized, oh, she would respond differently. She would interrupt him and respond to something he said. So figuring out how to make both of those things still work. It took a while. It took probably 5 to 10 minutes on just this single sentence, essentially, of how do I actually make this work? And I think it ended up working really well. But it's interesting how sometimes writing a story is just flowing your ideas onto a paper, and then other times, at least for me, it's very analytical and it's very much figuring out how to put a bunch of pieces together to fit the requirements that I set out in advance.
That's an amazing feeling when you're writing. Leaving that breadcrumb trail is one of my favorite things to do. I did it so much later as I was going back and doing revisions. I'm like, okay, I talk about this thing at the end of the book. Let me put a reference or a
Hmm.
hint at the beginning or somewhere earlier. So that way, when you see this thing later, you can get excited about it and be like, oh, I get it. I get it. I know. Okay, okay. I'm making connections. I'm drawing back to the beginning. All of these things are starting to make sense now. The puzzle is starting to come
Yeah.
together. You can see that bigger picture because writing and oftentimes reading is like putting together a puzzle when you don't have the box.
Yeah.
And so if you can have that sort of eureka moment, it makes you feel good as a writer, but it also makes the reader feel good, where they're like, I'm putting it together. I'm putting it together.
Hmm.
I see it. I see it now.
And I think the other important part of that is the reader gets that eureka moment. They get to put the puzzle together. They get to make these connections, but it also gives them something to hang things on, essentially. Because if you just introduce something late in the book, it's like, oh yeah, and this thing can happen, and it's really important to the story. Then that doesn't feel satisfying. We need to see it early in the book in an inconsequential way, and then later in the book, it's brought back, and then when it's brought back you get the satisfaction of A, making the connection, being like, I understand how all this works. But B, you also get the satisfaction of seeing this little thing at the beginning of the book become important. And you can be like, I knew about that. And that's really cool. And I think it also is very important for those critical moments in the story because it has to be a payoff. It can't just be something happening.
Right. You don't want to Deus Ex Machina somebody.
But even then, it's nice to set that up beforehand. But yeah, that was actually the ending of the book. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It was like, wait, okay, I need to change the ending of the book. I need to adjust how it happens because it's not telling the point that I want. Going back to the Odyssey musical. Then when I did that, it was like, well, this just kind of feels cheap. And so then I had to figure out, okay, how am I going to lay these breadcrumbs out early in the book so that instead of feeling cheap, it feels like a payoff of all the things I've set up about these characters. And that was what really broke it open for me. I don't think I could have expressed that a couple weeks ago, but that is what happened and it felt so cool and it was like you said, it was that eureka moment that was really really fun as an author and hopefully will be enjoyable as a reader.
Those are the moments that we hope to deliver.
So is there anything that you've been working on that you want to talk about?
I put in a submission this week, finally,
Ooh,
officially. We will see how it goes.
this is with the new query and all that stuff, rewriting the first chapter.
Yep, new chapter, new query letter. So check back with me in 2 months.
I still can't believe that that's the lead time for an initial response. That's insane.
Well, at least the benefit of this one is it was, if you haven't heard from me in 2 months, essentially ping me and not, it's a no. So that means that this person most likely responds to everything.
But at least you don't have to be like, oh, I guess you don't get closure the other method. At least with this method, you get closure and you get a little more respect, even if it's a rejection. That's nice.
It is. So I got to set a slightly less depressing alarm in my phone. Instead of saying it's a no, it's just ping so and so.
Well, I hope that goes well. I will keep crossing my fingers until you finally get published with that.
You and me both. I think that's a good place to wrap for now. If you want to see what I'm working on in the meantime, subscribe to my Substack, cparkgreen.substack.com. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, you can reach out to us at ctwriteforyourlife@gmail.com. As always, please leave reviews and likes and shares. It goes a very long way. Also, we have socials now. You should be able to search Write for Your Life and it should come up. I did my best to get those handles if I could. It's either that or CT Write for Your Life. I believe our Instagram is CT Write for Your Life, maybe, but Write for Your Life should find it either way. There will be links to that into the show notes below, along with everything else that we've discussed today. Anything you'd like to plug, Tim?
Just another plug for the Substack. Readings come out every Wednesday morning, just like this podcast, and they're absolutely fantastic. Caleb often doesn't talk about the fact that he is continuing to write these short stories and poems as well as doing all of his other stuff. It's very excellent, and I would encourage you, regardless of anything else, if you don't care about socials or whatever, just go read the short stories. They're really good.
Thank you. I love writing. That's why I do this and other things. So, and you can also be a foreshadowing ghost yourself because we'll talk about those things in the future.
Ooh.
And with that, keep writing, keep listening, keep being inspired.